In the peaceful town of Millbrook, the Hartley family was well loved. Dr. James Hartley worked as a heart doctor at the local hospital, and his wife, Sarah, was a favorite teacher at the elementary school. They were known for their strong 15-year marriage, which many in the community admired as a symbol of stability in a sometimes uncertain world. Sarah Hartley was known for her warm smile and kind nature, which made everyone feel comfortable. Her third-grade students loved her, and parents admired her hard work. At 38, she had a calm confidence and looked younger than her age, with her auburn hair and friendly green eyes. Dr. James Hartley, at 42, was tall and impressive. He carried himself with confidence, knowing he made a difference by saving lives. His colleagues respected him, and his patients trusted him deeply. To everyone else, the Hartleys seemed to have a perfect life. Their colonial-style home on Elm Street was the setting for many dinner parties and charity events. They were active in their local church and volunteered at the community center. James and Sarah appeared inseparable, often seen holding hands during their evening walks around the neighborhood. However, despite this picture of perfection, things were starting to go wrong behind the scenes. Dr. Olivia Chen arrived in Millbrook amid much excitement. The town's only gynecology practice was in desperate need of a new doctor, and Olivia's impressive credentials made her the perfect candidate. At 35, she was striking tall, with long black hair and an air of sophistication that seemed almost out of place in small-town Millbrook. Olivia quickly became popular among her patients. Her gentle manner and expertise put even the most nervous women at ease. She had a way of making each patient feel heard and understood, a quality that endeared her to the women of Millbrook. It was at a hospital fundraiser that Dr. Chen first met the Hartleys. Sarah, impressed by Olivia's reputation, immediately struck up a conversation. James, initially hanging back, found himself drawn into their discussion. There was something about Olivia, her intelligence, her quiet confidence that intrigued him. As the weeks passed, Sarah became one of Olivia's regular patients. She often spoke of how comfortable she felt with Dr. Chen, how she could discuss anything with her. James, hearing his wife's praises, found himself thinking about Olivia more and more. It started innocently enough. James and Olivia would run into each other at the hospital cafeteria, sharing quick lunches between patients. Their conversations, at first strictly professional, gradually became more personal. They discovered shared interests, a love for classical music, a passion for hiking, a fondness for obscure foreign films. James found himself looking forward to these chance encounters, his heart racing whenever he saw Olivia in the hospital corridors. He told himself it was nothing, just a harmless friendship with a colleague. But deep down, he knew it was more. First time they kissed was after a particularly stressful day at the hospital. A patient had coded on James' table, and though he managed to save her, the experience left him shaken. Olivia found him in the doctor's lounge, his head in his hands. She sat beside him, offering comfort and understanding. In a moment of vulnerability, their eyes met, and before either of them knew what was happening, their lips touched. Guilt washed over James immediately. He pulled away, mumbling apologies, his mind reeling. Olivia, equally shocked by her own actions, quickly left the room. They avoided each other for days after that, both trying to pretend it never happened. But the seed had been planted. The tension between them grew, the stolen glances and accidental touches becoming more frequent. Finally, after weeks of internal struggle, they gave in to their desires. Their affair was passionate and all-consuming. They met in secret in on-call rooms at the hospital. In a small apartment Olivia rented on the outskirts of town, in secluded spots in the nearby state park. James found himself living a double life, torn between his love for Sarah and his growing feelings for Olivia. Sarah, oblivious to her husband's infidelity, continued to sing Olivia's praises. She even invited the doctor to dinner parties at their home, unknowingly forcing James and Olivia to maintain their facade of casual acquaintanceship. As months passed, the guilt began to eat away at James. He became distant with Sarah, finding excuses to work late or attend medical conferences. Sarah, sensing the change in her husband, tried to rekindle their romance. She planned surprise date nights, bought new lingerie, even suggested they start trying for a baby, something they had put off for years due to their busy careers. James' guilt intensified. He knew he had to end things with Olivia to recommit to his marriage. But every time he tried to break it off, he found himself drawn back in, unable to resist the intoxicating pull of their forbidden relationship. It was a routine checkup that changed everything. Sarah sat in Olivia's office, nervously waiting for the results of her pregnancy test. When Olivia entered the room, her face uncharacteristically serious, Sarah's heart sank. "Sarah," Olivia began, her voice carefully neutral, "the test is positive. You're pregnant." Sarah's world spun. After years of not actively trying, it had finally happened. She was overjoyed, already imagining the look on James' face when she told him the news. But for Olivia, the revelation was devastating. She had suspected she might be pregnant, her period late, and her body feeling different. She had taken a home test that morning, seeing the 2 pink lines with a mixture of excitement and dread. Now, confirming Sarah's pregnancy, she felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her. Both women were pregnant, most likely with James Hartley's children. Olivia managed to maintain her professional demeanor as she went through the standard prenatal advice with Sarah. But inside, she was crumbling. How could she tell James? How could she bear to terminate this pregnancy, knowing it might be her only chance at motherhood? And how could she keep it, knowing it would destroy not just her career, but the lives of the Hartleys and their unborn child? That night, Olivia called James, asking to meet urgently. In a secluded corner of the park, she broke the news. James, already reeling from Sarah's joyful announcement earlier that evening, felt as if he were trapped in a nightmare. "I don't know what to do, James," Olivia sobbed, her usual composure shattered. "I can't have this baby, but I don't know if I can go through with an abortion either." And Sarah. Oh God, Sarah. James, his mind racing, tried to think logically. "We need time," he said, his voice shaking. "We need to think this through. Maybe I should tell Sarah the truth. Come clean about everything." Olivia's eyes widened in panic. "No, you can't. It would destroy her, James. And my career. I'd lose everything. We need to find another way." As they argued in hushed, desperate whispers, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows. A figure who had followed James from his home, suspicious of his late-night outing. A figure whose world was crumbling with every overheard word. Sarah Hartley stood frozen, her hand unconsciously resting on her stomach, as she listened to her husband and her trusted doctor discuss their affair and their unborn child. In that moment, her perfect life shattered into a million pieces. Sarah didn't confront James immediately. In shock, she returned home, her mind struggling to process what she had overheard. She lay awake all night, reliving every moment of her relationship with James, every interaction with Olivia, searching for signs she might have missed. When James returned home in the early hours of the morning, Sarah pretended to be asleep. She listened to him move around the room, noticed his heavy sighs, and restless, tossing and turning. Part of her wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand answers. But a colder, more calculating part of her held back. She needed time to think, to plan. Over the next few days, Sarah went through the motions of her normal life. She taught her classes, smiled at her neighbors, and even managed to feign excitement about the pregnancy when talking to friends. But inside, she was seething with rage and pain. She watched James closely, noting his distracted manner, the secretive phone calls, the way he flinched almost imperceptibly whenever Olivia's name was mentioned. Sarah began to gather evidence, credit card statements showing meals for two at restaurants she'd never visited, hotel receipts, mysterious texts on James' phone that he quickly deleted. A week after overhearing the conversation in the park, Sarah decided it was time to confront her husband. She waited until after dinner, the dishes cleared away, the house quiet. "James," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "we need to talk." James looked up from his medical journal, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I know about you and Olivia." The color drained from James' face. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Don't bother denying it," Sarah continued, her voice growing colder. "I know everything. The affair, the baby, yes, I know about that too. How could you, James? How could you do this to me? To us?" James slumped in his chair, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his exposed secrets. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I love you. I swear I do. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake." "A mistake?" Sarah's voice rose, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the store. This is a betrayal, James. You've destroyed everything we built together." Tears streamed down James' face as he tried to explain, to apologize, to find some way to salvage their relationship. But Sarah was beyond listening. "I want you out of this house," she said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. "Tonight, and don't even think about going to her. If you do, I swear, I'll make sure everyone in this town knows what kind of man you really are." James, broken and defeated, nodded silently. He packed a bag, casting longing glances at Sarah, who stood stiffly by the door, her face a mask of cold fury. As he stepped out into the night, he turned back one last time. "Sarah, please, can we talk about this? Maybe see a counselor? I'll do anything to make this right." Sarah looked at him, her green eyes hard as emeralds. "There's nothing left to say, James. You've made your choice. Now you have to live with it." In the days that followed, Millbrook buzzed with gossip. James Hartley, staying at the local motel, became a subject of speculation. Sarah, tight-lipped and withdrawn, refused to discuss the situation with anyone, even her closest friends. Olivia Chen, sensing the changed atmosphere, grew increasingly anxious. Patients began canceling appointments, and she overheard whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered a room. She tried to contact James, but he wasn't answering her calls or texts. James, for his part, was spiraling into depression. Suspended from the hospital, pending an investigation into his affair with a colleague, he spent his days holed up in his motel room, alternating between bouts of self-pity and desperate plans to win Sarah back. Olivia, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, spoke first. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." Sarah's eyes flashed with fury. "Save it," she spat. "You're just as guilty as he is. You knew he was married. You were my doctor, for God's sake. How could you?" Olivia flinched at the venom in Sarah's voice. It wasn't planned, Sarah. It just happened. I know that's no excuse, but you're right. It's not, Sarah interrupted. You've ruined everything. My marriage, my trust, my future. I hope you're happy with yourself, Olivia. I hope you and James enjoy your perfect little family. With that, Sarah stormed off, leaving her shopping cart abandoned in the aisle. Olivia stood there, tears streaming down her face, as curious onlookers pretended not to stare. Neither woman noticed James, who had witnessed the entire exchange from the end of the aisle. His face a mask of anguish, he slipped out of the store unseen. That night, James made a decision. He couldn't bear the pain he had caused, couldn't face the wreckage of his life. With shaking hands, he penned 3 letters, one to Sarah, one to Olivia, and one to his unborn children. Then he drove to the cliff overlooking Millbrook Lake. The next morning, a jogger found James Hartley's car parked near the cliff edge. The driver's door was open, and on the seat lay 3 sealed envelopes. Of James himself, there was no sign. The police were called, and a search began. Divers scoured the lake while search parties combed the surrounding woods. As news of James' disappearance spread, the town held its collective breath. Sarah, despite her anger, was beside herself with worry. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was somehow responsible, that her harsh words had driven James to do something drastic. Olivia, too, was frantic, her pregnancy forgotten in her panic over James' fate. It was 3 days before they found him. James' body was discovered in a secluded area of the woods, not far from where his car had been parked. He had taken an overdose of prescription medication, a painless end for a man who could no longer bear the pain he had caused others. The news hit Millbrook like a shockwave. The tragic end to the scandal that had gripped the town for weeks left everyone reeling. Sarah, upon hearing the news, collapsed in grief. For all her anger, she had never truly stopped loving James. The thought that she would never have the chance to forgive him, to try and rebuild what they had lost, was devastating. Olivia, already emotionally fragile, was hospitalized for fear of complications with her pregnancy. The stress of the past weeks, culminating in James' suicide, had taken a severe toll on her health. In the aftermath of the tragedy, the letters James had left behind were delivered. Sarah's contained a heartfelt apology, a plea for forgiveness, and a request that she not blame Olivia for what had happened. He took full responsibility for the affair and its consequences, expressing deep remorse for the pain he had caused. Olivia's letter was similarly apologetic, but also included instructions for accessing a bank account James had set up for their child. He wanted to ensure that whatever happened, his child would be provided for. The third letter, addressed to his unborn children, was perhaps the most heartbreaking of all. In it, James expressed his deep regret at not being there to watch them grow up. He wrote of his hopes for their futures, his wish that they would learn from his mistakes, and his unconditional love for them, despite the circumstances. In the weeks following James' suicide, Millbrook struggled to come to terms with the tragedy. The town that had once prided itself on its peaceful, idyllic nature now found itself thrust into the spotlight, the subject of sensational news stories and true crime podcasts. Sarah Hartley retreated from public life, taking an extended leave of absence from her teaching position. She spent her days in the home she had once shared with James, alternating between bouts of grief and anger. The pregnancy, which should have been a source of joy, became a painful reminder of what she had lost. Olivia Chen, released from the hospital but still under close medical supervision, became a virtual recluse. She closed her practice, citing health reasons, but everyone knew the real cause. The once respected doctor was now a pariah in the community she had hoped to call home. As the initial shock wore off, questions began to surface. The circumstances of James' death seemed straightforward at first. A man overcome by guilt and shame, taking his own life. But as details emerged, some began to wonder if there was more to the story. Detective Lisa Morgan of the Millbrook Police Department had been troubled by the case from the start. Something about the scene at the cliff hadn't sat right with her. Now, as she reviewed the evidence for what felt like the 100th time, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something. The autopsy report sat open on her desk, its clinical language detailing the cocktail of drugs found in James' system. The dosage was high, certainly lethal, but was it definitively self-administered? And then there was the matter of James' car parked neatly at the cliff's edge, driver's door left open. It felt staged, somehow. Detective Morgan decided it was time to dig deeper. She started by re-interviewing Sarah and Olivia, hoping to uncover any details they might have overlooked in the immediate aftermath of James' death. Sarah, pale and drawn, received the detective in her living room. The house, once warm and inviting, now felt like a mausoleum. Mrs. Hartley, Detective Morgan began gently. I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you a few more questions about the night your husband disappeared. Sarah nodded numbly, her hand unconsciously moving to her slightly swollen belly. Can you walk me through that evening again? Did James say anything unusual? Did he seem distressed? Sarah closed her eyes, thinking back. He tried to talk to me. Said he wanted to explain, to make things right. But I was so angry. I told him to leave, that I never wanted to see him again. Her voice broke. I didn't mean it. I was just so hurt. Detective Morgan made a note. And after he left, did you hear from him again? Sarah shook her head. No. The next thing I knew, the police were at my door, telling me his car had been found. The detective's next stop was Olivia Chen's apartment. The formerly poised and confident doctor was a shadow of her former self, her pregnancy now visibly advanced. Dr. Chen, Detective Morgan said, taking in the woman's haggard appearance. I need to clarify a few points about your relationship with Dr. Hartley. Olivia flinched at James' name, but nodded for the detective to continue. When was the last time you spoke with him? Olivia's brow furrowed in concentration. It was the day before he disappeared. He called me, sounding frantic. Said he needed to see me, that he had a plan to make everything right. And did you meet him? Olivia shook her head. No, I was scared. Things were falling apart so quickly. I told him I needed time to think. That was the last time I heard his voice. Tears welled up in her eyes. If I had known, if I had just agreed to meet him. Detective Morgan made a note to check James' phone records. If there was a call to Olivia the day before his death. As she left Olivia's apartment, the detective's mind was racing. Both women's stories seemed genuine, their grief palpable. But something still didn't add up. James Hartley, by all accounts, had been a man who valued control. Would he really have chosen such a public and messy way to end his life? The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. A teenage boy, Travis McKenzie, came forward with a video he had taken on the night of James' disappearance. Travis, an amateur filmmaker, had been at the cliff that night, hoping to capture some night sky footage for a school project. The video, shaky and partially obscured by foliage, showed a car pulling up to the cliff's edge. A figure, presumably James, got out and stood by the edge for several minutes. Then, unexpectedly, a second car pulled up. This was the evidence they needed. James Hartley hadn't committed suicide, he had been murdered. On the night of James' death, David had followed him to the cliff. Confronting James, he had presented him with an ultimatum: take the pills he had brought, or David would expose the affair publicly, ruining both James and Olivia's careers and lives. In a final act of desperation, and perhaps misguided nobility, James had taken the pills. David had then staged the scene to look like a suicide, using the letters James had written as part of his cover-up. The arrest of David Chen sent shockwaves through Millbrook. Quiet accountant, who had stood by his wife's side throughout the scandal, was revealed to be the true villain of the piece. Olivia, devastated by this final betrayal, went into premature labor. Sarah, in an unexpected act of compassion, was by her side in the delivery room. Both women, victims of circumstance and the actions of the men they had trusted, found an unlikely bond in their shared grief and a miracle of new life. In the end, David Chen was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The story of the Hartley-Chen scandal faded from the headlines, but its impact on Millbrook lingered. Sarah Hartley gave birth to a healthy baby boy, whom she named James, in memory of the man she had loved and lost. Despite the painful reminders, she found joy in motherhood and slowly began to rebuild her life. Olivia Chen, after giving birth to a daughter, decided to leave Millbrook. She moved to a small town on the West Coast, where she eventually reopened her practice, dedicating herself to helping women who had suffered trauma and abuse. And in Millbrook, life gradually returned to normal. But beneath the surface of manicured lawns and friendly smiles, the residents knew that even in the most perfect-seeming places, darkness could lurk. The tragedy had taught them the importance of compassion, forgiveness, and the devastating consequences of secrets and lies. As years passed, the story of James Hartley, Olivia Chen, and the fateful affair that ended in murder became a cautionary tale, whispered about in hushed tones, a reminder that the deepest betrayals can come from those we trust the most.